Our coverage tonight begins in the nation's capital, Abuja, where the Senate has confirmed the appointment of Balarabe Lawal from Kaduna State, Odele Olawande from Ondo State, and Jamila Bio Ibrahim from Kwara State as ministers of the Federal Republic. The confirmation, however, was not short of its own drama, as Lawal had slumped on the floor of the Senate during a screening exercise. The President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, had announced the confirmation of the ministers after they were cleared through a voice vote by members of Parliament. News Central's Amadin Uyi reports.
The screening exercise commenced on the floor of the Senate shortly after the commencement of plenary. Jamila Bio Ibrahim, the nominee for the Youth Ministry from Kwara State, appeared before lawmakers, saying she's aware of the challenges being faced by Nigerian youths.
We're aware of the challenges that Nigerian youth are faced with: underemployment, unemployment, yes, and of course, poor access to health, access to affordable and quality healthcare, poor access to quality education, and of course, we are deprived of skills that will make us keep up with the current realities of the job market.
She promised that if cleared by the Senate, she will lead by example and be a model for many.
If confirmed, Mr. President, thank you, sir. If confirmed as the Minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to pilot the affairs of the Youth Ministry, my first and most important role would be to inspire young people.
Balarabe Lawal from Kaduna State then took his turn, convincing lawmakers of his capacity and preparedness for the job.
I have been part of administration, I've been part of policy making, I've been part of trying to change things in the country based on what I did at the federal level.
After a little over 20 minutes, a mild drama ensued as he slumped on the floor of the Senate.
Can you say water, give me water. Water and sugar. Water and sugar. Get sugar, and water. Is there where is Dr. Wale? Can the camera see immediately?
The Senate then went into a closed-door session. The screening exercise continued after the emergency was dealt with. The President of the Senate then took a voice vote where lawmakers unanimously confirmed their nomination. This brings the total number of ministers that will serve in the administration of President Bola Tinubu to 48. Amadin Uyi, reporting for News Central.
And joining me tonight to discuss this situation further is Dr. Jide Johnson, a political analyst. One, welcome to you, Dr. Johnson, and thanks for joining us in Nigeria tonight.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you, Gbenga, and a pleasure to be with our viewers all over the world. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, Dr. Johnson. Now, let's get straight to it. With 3 cleared nominees, Nigeria will have a total of 48 ministers, and people say the president needs people to execute his plans for the country, while others argue that the size of the cabinet does not reflect the austere realities of the country. A lot has also been said about the need to reduce the cost of governance. What do you make of a cabinet the size of 48? Is it really necessary?
Well, it's the prerogative of the president to appoint ministers and to select people across the length and breadth of Nigeria to serve in his cabinet as members of the Federal Executive Council. However, considering the reality of time and considering the challenges that Nigeria is facing presently, and considering the clamor over time on the need for us to reduce the cost of governance, you agree with me that 48 ministers is too unwieldy, and then there is no need for us. What the Constitution made provision for is a minister from each of the states of the Federation, and if you consider Abuja to be a state of the Federation, it has 37. Now we are having 48 ministers, and I've asked this question: what will be the kind of deliberations they will have in the Federal Executive Council? I think what the president has done is just to reward political loyalty and to ensure that there is a political payback to those that make investment in this election. because as far as I'm concerned, some of these ministries, some of these newly created ministries are just duplication, if not triplication, or quadrupulation of
Existing
responsibilities,
ministries.
because there's an overlap of the responsibilities some of these ministers and some of these ministries will be performing. So as far as I'm concerned, I agree with those that said, well, you know what, this is contrary to the need for us to reduce the cost of governance, because if you look at the number of ministers, 48 ministers, they will have the type of aids they will have, and the kind of resources that will be invested on them as ministers or ministers of state. However, like I said earlier, it's the prerogative of the president, and the president must also understand that he needs to send the right messages to Nigeria in this particular austere time where inflation is double digit and the cost of living is very, very high, and the standard of living is very, very low.
Now, Dr. Johnson, a few reactions have filled the appointment from of Southeasterners to the point of allegations of marginalization in the president's appointment. You did say the Constitution says you must appoint a minister from each state. That has been fulfilled. But what do you make of this talk of marginalization of Easterners in his administration?
Well, people from the Southeast should feel aggrieved with respect to the number of ministers that have been allocated to the Southeast. Because if you look at the distribution of the ministers across the geopolitical zone, you will discover that the Southeast has been changed. And judging from our history, coming from what led to Biafra War, the Civil War in the 1960s to the late 1960s to 1970s, and various clamor over time, you agree with me that to a large extent, the Southeast has been a bit marginalized and not fully represented in terms of the ratio of ministers to each of the geopolitical zones. By arrangement, not in our constitution, but by an arrangement of convention, we have 6 geopolitical zones. And if you look at it, it's more or less like the Southeast has been changed with respect to the number of ministries that have gone to the Southeast. And I think it is very, very important for us to run an inclusive government. And it's very, very important for us to make every section of this country to feel part and parcel of united Nigeria. And I think that those that are minding the president and those that are managing the president should have drawn his attention to this anomaly. As far as I'm concerned, that's my opinion. I'm entitled to it. To give a sense of belonging, particularly to the Southeast, in order to reduce the agitation at the level of demand for self-rule, particularly by the ECN and other groups in the Southeast calling for self-determination and self-rule in the Southeast. We must show some level of fairness, equity, and justice. We must be just in our approach, and I think that the president and his team have not been just to the Southeast. We must run an all-inclusive government. If you narrow it down to what has happened in Lagos State, for example, excuse me, please. In Lagos State, you usually have a cabinet where you have non-indigenous as part and parcel of the cabinet. But for the very first time in the history of this country, we had a cabinet in Lagos State whereby non-indigenous were not included, were extremely excluded from membership of the cabinet in Lagos State. So it's important for us to send the right signal to include elections have ended, and there's a need for us to understand that its governance should include every strata and every segment of Nigerian society.
Now, Dr. Johnson, today's screening and confirmation has again brought to the fore what people have termed the lack of seriousness attached to the task by the Senate. The first nominee to be screened was asked to take a bow and leave without any questions, and the second could not be questioned because of his health challenge. But all of them were confirmed. So what's your reaction to how the senators treat the screening of political appointees?
The Senate and the House of Rep, talking about oversight function and talking about the first term of government, if you check the Constitution, by the constitutional arrangement in terms of hierarchy, the first term of government is the legislature, the second arm is the executive, and the third arm is the judiciary. That shows the importance in which the framers of the Constitution attach to the legislature, which should be the voice of the people and which plays a critical role in terms of checks and balances and in terms of oversight function. I think that over time, the legislature, not limited to Nigeria, but mortgage their roles and their responsibility and their position in the management of the affairs of country. For example, you saw the the nominee from Kaduna State, he collapsed, and then the Senate president was talking about water. You can imagine that even there's no provision for first aid services in the National Assembly. What happened to that nominee from Balarabe, Mr. Balarabe from Kaduna? Could have happened to any senator, an House of Rep member, or could have happened to any staff working in National Assembly. What is the emergency response that we have? Besides that, they were screened today, and all of them were cleared today. People should understand that the basis of selecting people, appointing people, nominating people, and screening them, and subsequent clearance of these people is a serious responsibility that has been placed in the National Assembly and trusted on behalf of the people as part of what should be the responsibility of the National Assembly in terms of delegated authority. But the situation whereby you have the National Assembly just rubber stamping and approving whoever appears before them does not go well for democracy. If we think that, well, it's because, well, it's the same party that controls the National Assembly that controls the executive. You'll recall that the challenges we had from 2015 to 2022 was as a result of particularly the 9th Assembly, because the 8th Assembly under Saraki was a bit proactive. Under Saraki and Dogara was a bit proactive and was able to hold the Buhari's administration its first time to accountability. And those that frames the constitution and give responsibility to each organ of this government wanted them to act as checks and balances so that we can have good governance. But the situation whereby the National Assembly has subjugated their responsibility and their role and their authority to that, to the whims and the caprice of
it's not a good look for democracy. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Jide Johnson, as always. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for your insight.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Gbenga. Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Johnson.
And good day to our viewers all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you.